We begin this hour following a week where May Day demonstrators held more than 3,300 events across the country in a rebuke of the Trump administration and to stand up for workers' rights. A week where another item was added to the list of federal institutions and programs that Trump is planning to brand literally in his image. It was a week where Trump's active enablers in the Justice Department escalated his retribution campaign against a longtime foe, and a week where the conservative supermajority on the Supreme Court handed down a decision that struck a major blow against one of the most consequential laws in this nation's history, removing protections against racial discrimination in voting and representation. The repercussions of those enablers' actions will be felt for generations. Joining us now is Eric Holder, the 82nd Attorney General of the United States and now chairman of the National Democratic Redistricting Committee. Attorney General Holder, so always thank you for coming to the weekend. Thank you for being here. You know, the Supreme Court took a huge whack at the Voting Rights Act of 1965 in 2013 in a case known as Shelby v. Holder, you being the holder in Shelby v. Holder. Now here we are 13 years later, and they've taken a whack at it again, effectively rendering invalid Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Just give us your reaction to the Supreme Court's decision, and what does it mean for the nation going forward?
Well, this is a continuation of a radical path that this court has been on since Citizens United. There's a suite of anti-democracy cases that the Roberts Court has put in place. Citizens United, the Shelby County case, as you indicate, which took away from the Justice Department its ability to pre-clear changes that were made in states that had historically deprived African Americans of their right to vote. The Rucho case, which said you can't bring partisan gerrymandering cases in federal courts, and that, if the case had gone the other way, we would not be in the midst of this redistricting crisis, this gerrymandering crisis that we're now in. And now this latest case, Calais, which essentially takes out of the hands of those of us who want to try to protect our democracy, a vital tool that the 65 Voting Rights Act gave to us. I mean, the 65 Voting Rights Act is the crown jewel of the civil rights movement. It increased Black voter participation, made it easier for people to vote in those places where they historically had been denied that opportunity. And now this radical, and I mean, people need to understand this radical Supreme Court is really trying to make it easier for corporations, those people in power, to participate in our process, while making it more difficult for ordinary citizens generally, people of color more specifically, and very more specifically, African Americans to have that right to participate as they're due as American citizens.
Attorney General, I want to read this quote from a Republican strategist in Louisiana that was given to Liz Crampton over at my old shop, Politico. It is an unmitigated sugar honey iced tea show fever dream. Talking about Louisiana in 2 days before canceling their primaries, even though people had already started to vote in absentee. I saw that and I was disturbed by it, because the way that you just talked about the gutting of the Voting Rights Act, who it impacts, why everyone should care about it, not just Black people, who it impacts disproportionately. And hearing all of this glee on the Republican side about doing that to people, about, according to probably you and a lot of other election experts, creating more second-class citizenry in this country. And I'm curious, when you hear quotes like that from Republican strategists, what goes through your head?
Well, I think he's saying the quiet part out loud. That's exactly what it is that they are trying to do. The Republican Party, or too many in the Republican Party, have made peace with the notion that when it comes to popular support, they're going to be a minority party. They're not going to get the majority of the votes, but they're going to have the majority of the power. And yeah, this is most acutely directed at people of color, and as I said, African Americans, but all Americans need to be concerned about this, because the Supreme Court saying, well, you know, we're going to take this tool away from you when it comes to racial gerrymandering, but it's okay. If you engage in partisan gerrymandering, that affects every American. That decreases the ability of every American citizen to participate in our democracy. That allows politicians to pick their voters as opposed to American citizens choosing who their representatives ought to be. So this isn't just a black thing. This isn't just a Hispanic thing. This is also something that ought to concern every American. And what they're doing is inconsistent with our notions of the American people deciding the policy directions of this nation, the American people deciding what kind of America we're going to have. They want to consign that responsibility, that ability to a distinct minority.
Given the power grab that you just laid out as the chairman of the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, what do you do next, given everything that we're hearing from all of these GOP-led states about efforts to continue to redraw their maps?
Well, we certainly try to find litigation ways in which we can, even given what the Supreme Court has said, when they said that we couldn't, bring partisan gerrymandering cases in federal courts, we said, all right, we'll bring those cases in state courts, and we've been wildly successful there. We've unwound a lot of the gerrymanders that they put in place in 2011. Beyond that, I think the ultimate goal has to be for Congress to pass legislation that bans partisan gerrymandering, that bans racial gerrymandering, that puts into place those reforms that were contained in the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which got out of the House of Representatives the last time, didn't pass the Senate because you couldn't get past the filibuster, largely because Senators Manchin and Sinema decided that they did not want to vote to reform the rules. And so the next time there is that ability by Democrats, if we have the presidency as well as the House and the Senate, that to use that power. One of the things that just kind of gets me is that progressives and Democrats have a reluctance, an uncomfortability with the acquisition and the use of power. And Republicans don't have those problems. Conservatives don't have those problems. And so the next time we have that power, we need to use it, not for the special interests, as Republicans have done, but in service to the American people. Roosevelt didn't have any problem using power. Johnson didn't have any problem using power. Obama didn't have any problems using power. The next time we have that capacity, that ability, we have to use it.
Attorney General Holder, one of the ways the Trump administration is using power is by weaponizing the Department of Justice. Just look at what Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche has done in the re-indictment, a second indictment against former FBI Director James Comey. I mean, I can see it for what it is. Lots of people can see it for what it is. But how damaging is it to the department that this is how the Department of Justice is being used? Not just by the man who wants to get the nod for the top job, but at the direction of the President of the United States.
Yeah, this is obviously destructive of the way in which the Justice Department has normally conducted itself under Republican as well as Democratic attorneys general and presidents. And people need to understand it. This is not normal. What's going on here is not only not normal, it is dangerous. When you have the Justice Department or the Justice Ministry going after the political opponent of the person who is in charge, this is more like Putin in Russia. It's more like Orban in Hungary. It is inconsistent with the way in which the United States has always conducted itself. And it is an attempt to try to chill political opposition. It's a way in which you try to control the opposition. And we've got to push back in every way that we possibly can. Ultimately, it's going to be up to the American people who have enormous amounts of power, more power than I think they realize, to push back against this and to say to this administration, no, we're not going to let you do what you're trying to do. And so the November elections are extremely important. The November elections, the midterms, are a way in which we can put a check in place on of this administration. I really fear, what is an unchecked Donald Trump going to look like over the course of the next 2 years? That's why November really, really matters.
In your answer to Jackie, you kind of, and you tell me if I took it wrong, insinuated that Democrats are maybe uncomfortable with wielding, figuring out how to use power in this current day and age. And I wonder what you think, as someone who has sat in the Attorney General's seat who has had to make the decisions, who has, I assume, also had to make reforms, right? Like also had to think about what are the ways in which I want to change things. What are the ways you think the next democratically appointed DOJ should create an accountability structure, right, to find the laws that have been broken, but also look at the things that have happened, the ways in which it's been gutted, the ways in which it's been changed and bastardized, and fix those?
Well, I think there's going to have to be reform measures put in place, and not reform measures, really just kind of a return to that which the Justice Department has always done. They're going to have to be personnel changes. I mean, those people who currently serve in the United States Department of Justice who are not committed to the ideals of the department, they got to go. They simply have to go. And if you follow the Supreme Court with this unitary executive theory, the President of the United States and his designee, the Attorney General, will have the ability to sweep out of office those people who have not conducted themselves in a way that's consistent with what's best about the United States Department of Justice. I mean, the Justice Department, I think, can recover through making these personnel changes relatively quickly, but the reputation of the department has been harmed for, I think, and that is going to take a much longer period of time to put back in place. You know, you've been trying a drug case in Idaho, and an FBI agent is there and being questioned by an assistant United States attorney. There are going to be people on the jury who think, well, are these folks doing this for political reasons? Can we believe what it is that the government is saying? That is the larger harm that I think is going to take a greater amount of time to actually cure.
Probably no better person to talk about these issues with your experience at the DOJ and with what the work you're doing on redistricting. So former Attorney General Eric Holder, we appreciate you coming to The Weekend.